And then in the subsequent years, they did start to create programs to subsidize rental housing. And then in 1973, a number of programs to encourage nonprofit groups. Right now, there are listeners to the show, Charles, who were involved with the Lions Club and Rotary and built nonprofit housing for seniors. But it died. It really died. And for about 20 years, we really haven't built enough housing to accommodate those of lower income who simply can't afford $1,500 or $2,000 a month rent, let alone trying to buy $1 million home. And that's why we have failed, I think, compared to many other countries. The other thing is in Canada, we do have a tradition of home ownership. Approximately 6 out of every 10 people in Canada want to own their homes. In other countries, it's not that high. Even Switzerland and Germany, that we think of as very wealthy countries, their percentage of home ownership is much less. A lot more people rent.
Well, rents are a lot more reasonable, are they not?
Rents are reasonable, and people are not devoting. I mean, God Macy has generally said that affordable housing is housing that costs no more than 30% of your income.
Who the fuck?
There's people listening to us right now saying 30%. I'm paying 60% of my income. Some people are paying 70 and 80% of their income just for housing. And that's the problem that we've created in this country. And I must say, all across the country right now, people who are in the market to buy a home are hearing about bidding wars, and they're bidding more than the asking price and so forth. And I must say, I really do worry, especially when interest rates climb, and they will climb, how much of their income is going to go towards housing rather than food or other necessities.
Michael, the first time I wanted a mortgage on a house, it would have been the early 80s, I guess. And I remember the loans officer at the bank said that she wanted to make sure that whatever house I was purchasing, in order to pay the nut every month, to pay the mortgage and interest and all of that, utilities, that wouldn't take up more than 25% of my income. Can you remember that? And can you imagine how much easier life would be today if 25% was a real number?
Yes. Not only can I remember that, I can remember when I came to Vancouver in 1981 and saw a house that my wife was always in love with for sale for just under $360,000, and 2 years later we bought it for $180,000.
Wait, what?
Now I mention that because most of the people, the younger people who are listening to you right now, and I'm sure there are a lot of young people who listen to your show, they don't believe that house prices can go down.
Well, they don't care. They'll just lift some bricks.
And that is something that is a bit worrying. It's worrying, I know, for people at CMHC and the federal government. But what the federal government
let me just jump in there because I think we need some context. So let me just ask the simple question. Was there a deep recession in the country, or was there one in British Columbia when you saw that price plunge?
No, it was happening across Canada where we saw a dramatic increase in interest rates.
21.
And I mean, today, people are taking out mortgages at 2%. In those days, we were delighted if you could get a 14%.
They don't care if the
housing
price goes down. They're thinking of interest rate, because that's what Mr. Trudeau told them. The budget will balance itself.
Where there were a bunch of townhomes that suddenly came on the market because people couldn't afford to keep them going because the interest rates were climbing to 12, 13, 14, 15, 16%. So they were walking away, and the rent was incredibly cheap for a while, just to take advantage of these houses that that basically the bank had to do something with because people had just been unable to afford their mortgages. So there was that blip.
And I'm
pretty sure, you can correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the expert on this. I'm pretty sure that would have been in the early 1980s.
Yes, no, that's right. There was tremendous turmoil. Now, the interesting thing is traditionally governments have tried to play a role in addressing housing affordability in different ways. And whenever you speak to a developer, I'll tell you that the best way to address affordability is to increase supply. But what we're seeing is more and more governments are really trying to use various taxation programs to try and address affordability. And that's one of the reasons why, well, I can understand the popularity of saying we're going to tax foreign investors who are keeping housing simply like a safety deposit box rather than making it available to house Canadians.
You're not damaging
That's an extremely popular thing to say. But from a practical point of view, I don't believe that's going to have any significant benefit in terms of addressing housing affordability. But it'll be popular politically. And I know
it's only popular because people who don't know anything about real estate think that it'll make a difference. That's just an emotional pitch, you know. It's the foreigner. The foreigner is the problem. The foreigner is the enemy. Make the foreigner pay more and we'll all pay less. I mean, that's...
when they sell, guess what? You're going to have to pay them that 15%.
That scam has been run by so many different governments and so many different politicians over the years for so many different reasons. And there's not much... Well,
you're in BC. Why are you talking about that
in the marketplace?
And we have a lot of proof of that because 3 or 4 years ago, if you came to Vancouver and stopped everyone on the street and said, "What do we need to do to improve housing affordability?" They'd say,
"They would have said, get the fuck out of my way, I'm busy."
Well, we did. We stopped the foreigners from buying, and meanwhile, Canadians are paying $300,000 over the asking price for properties on the market today in Vancouver. It's got nothing to do with foreigners. It's got to do with supply and demand, and a lot of emotion.
And they built.
In just a few moments, I want to take this conversation in a slightly different direction. Michael Geller is an architect. He's a planner. He's a former CMHC person. Most important, he's a tremendous conversation.
Do you know where the sewers in Toronto run?
In Vancouver in a moment, right here, Charles Adler tonight.
Does your business sound like this? We'll make it sound like this. That's the sound of a business.
It's the sound of a business in 1988. Nice. They're gonna be gone for another 8 minutes of commercials. Oh well, this is. I can worry about that after and just do this. That's what I was gonna do. That's what.
Coming up from the city, it's a pity. My boys say baby, he's always by my side when we ride to the other side, headed to the store so we can get some more.
That's why I don't like this fuzzy polyester type.
But that's how he was doing well. Not deep in the trail, from town all the way to the surrounding hills. Well, his heart, he was chilling in the dark, twisting bottle caps, the boom back slots, and that's a fact. Blah, how you like us now, creative motherfuckers with the illest style. If you understood it would make you smile. If you participated, it would make us proud. I miss my hip hop brothers, I'ma say it loud. Yeah, I'ma say it loud. Taking it down. What? Told me this insane. Taught me what I know today. Dusty Bible creates the cycle. When we're chilling, everything's alright. Yo, Cali keep the freak. Better listen when he speaks from the tip. When he spits, make your motherfuckers real sick. Johnny catching up with the quickness. Deuce getting ill with the militant skills. At the top of this, he don't miss. On stress all day with the wordplay. When he's crazy, no delays. Got something to say. Strap low when he gets on the mic. He don't choke. Up in the building, your hoes better know. Love, little crazy, but I got mad love. Handshakes, no short subs. This is my FCF and my TAFT. Family rock. Taking it down.
So they can't shoot this cop. They have to put him in jail. Then what was ever the potential for civil unrest? Okay, see, I piss everybody off and then I make them. Oh yeah, 1 out of every 5 inmates in jail is Aboriginal. Went from 16% to 20%.
Welcome to Mi'kmaq Matters, a podcast about the Mi'kmaq people, politics.
Hey. Batman. 20 shirt on the back. Hey. My watch is Batman 2019. I'm waiting to fuck this shit. Maybe I come back. Or a little dialogue. Hey.
Charles Hadler.
We're talking to Michael Geller, back to the Trippz question. Michael, let me just throw it to you. If you were working for the government again, and your mandate was to try to do something
A lot of people just say,
to make housing in this country more affordable, what would Michael Geller do?
I would review some of the older CMHC programs that were quite effective, especially related to creating rental housing. Because I do believe for a lot of people, rental housing is a very, very good solution. And over the years, CMHC had a number of programs that encouraged developers to build rental housing. The other thing is, and you may remember this, Charles, you and I may be the only 2 people old enough to remember this, but there was a time when the federal government allowed business people, doctors, dentists to invest in housing and then write off some of the costs against their income. And that encouraged a lot of people to invest money in rental housing. And so many of the apartment buildings in Toronto and across the country,
right off.
They were built using money that was brought into the market from those professionals. Those are 2 programs that I think the federal government can do, which would be effective.
It's interesting. You mentioned that that was extremely successful. And there's a huge pool of capital out there from some of the same kinds of folks that you're talking about, especially some of them who've done very well in the stock market in the last few years and now want to give it a breather because they don't believe that it'll keep rocking the way it's been rocking for the last half a decade. And so the money would be available if only the government put it to work.
Yeah. So people, I mean, we all like to buy things when they're on
everything
sale.
in my house,
And
and
so
then the price will automatically
housing is
keep
on sale
up
for the next 5 years, and people who want to invest in rental housing in their communities will be able to get a modest tax break, and it doesn't need to be that dramatic. I think that could be an effective way to increase the supply of rental housing. I think the other thing is encouraging these partnerships between the nonprofit groups and the private sector, and this is happening to some degree.
Charity you create, so you can write off
to this current
profits you
federal
make off the
government
charity you create.
because it has decided that it is important to help fund the Lions Clubs and the Rotaries and the nonprofits to create a housing for those who simply can't afford it in the private marketplace. The one thing I would love the federal government to do is something it can't do, and that's to tell the municipalities to approve more housing development, especially good housing development. But
apparently if you have money, they do it.
Michael, one of the reasons I'm motivated to do this right now is because, of course, the pandemic is the umbrella over all of us.
20 floors down.
And there's no doubt that much of the spread is coming from people who are living in close quarters with a number of other people. We still have situations in this country, and we always have had, and we always will, where 2 or 3 families are living in the same apartment. It would be nice if they could live in somewhat bigger quarters, and they can't do that unless things are affordable. So I think there's a public health impetus for this to happen. What are your thoughts?
I think that's
somehow every single one of those people is going out and back every day. That's
is that the origin of zoning, saying you can build an apartment here and a single family house here and a factory here, was actually founded on the principle of good health, because it wanted to separate the noxious industrial uses from residential uses. That was the foundation of zoning. And I think today we need to think a little bit more about this. And the one thing that is important, many people are saying, you know, because of COVID, I'm not sure living in these high-density, high-rise apartments in downtown Toronto or Ottawa and Montreal is a good idea.
That's not the
I
problem.
disagree with that.
Everybody
I
thinks
don't
having
think
their
there's
own
anything
house
wrong
is somehow
with
better.
higher
You got the
density
air from the last
buildings,
30 blocks
but
of
there
houses.
is a
just
problem
going
with
through your house.
overcrowding. And that is why COVID has, at least in Vancouver where I live, and I think to a certain degree in other Canadian cities, encouraged the local governments to look at those who are homeless, who are living in the most dire circumstances and shelters, to say, for purely health reasons, we have to improve the lives of these people. And so we are seeing some things beginning to happen, some improvements, which we've been hoping for the last 20 years. They are happening now because of COVID. So you make a very good point there, Charles.
I live next door to a uranium.
I need a quick answer on this, Michael. Would you want regulations on how many people you can have living in a particular apartment suite?
Belongs to a company that made $3 billion
Well,
last
believe it or not, some municipalities still have those kinds of regulations, but they're often ignored. I don't really want regulations. What I want to see is increasing the supply of housing so that people don't have to live in these overcrowded situations.
Well, I have to ask you the question, but I can't disagree with your answer because I agree with it 100%. Michael Geller, thank you as always for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
And your experience and your wisdom. And Michael Geller is an architect, planner, developer, educator, and a blogger. So one of the most popular people that we've had on in terms of medicine, public medicine, emergency medicine, and COVID-19 is a fellow by the name of Dr. Darren Merklin. He works in intensive care in some of the most difficult hospitals in the Edmonton area. He's also a professor at the University of Alberta.
One of those shadows,
and another, of course, tremendous conversationalist. Dr. Darren Merklin will be talking about not just the COVID situation in Alberta, but the COVID situation throughout the country right now during this third wave. So in a moment, Markland with yours truly, and we'll also take more of your phone.
This spring on Showcase.
My patriarchal ancestor, Lawrence,
the creator of The Good Place and Parks and Recreation.
Nathan, I'm calling to request a response to Mayor Chisenhall's decision to move Big Larry. I'm sorry, what?
This is the fifth time someone's crashed into that statue. It's a public safety issue.
I'm gonna get this town on my side.
Freestyling over James Dean and Pantera. No, that's damn it. That clicking is loud.
Lamont, her new project superintendent.
The job is so perfect for me. I had a career breakthrough.
The fact that there was still more to do. Let's hear from some residents of Oakland, California.
I was kind of half surprised that the right decision was made and half relieved, I guess.
Mainly more police officers will probably see this as like a lesson and like we can't just do whatever we want.
I can't say I'm pleasantly surprised because at the end of the day, a person still lost their life to this unjust system.
What about, fuck, what's his name? The guy from the BART.
Niggas don't love you, that's a fact. Keep the Mac, no G's. God bless me, no sneeze, niggas.
There was one kid who was just standing inside of the road, just looking at it, shot in the back or something on the BART.
I just put that 2019. I'm waiting to fuck that shit. Maybe I come back. Portland down.
Thank you. YG back from the tracks, so my crack shit's back to the stack. Niggas don't love you, that's a fact. Keep the Mac, no no cheese. God bless me, no sneeze. Niggas see me and breeze. 40 no shit, he's got the strap to the slap. They moving like a stack. Never lack, just rack. Put them in a box, no jack. Roll one deep, never need a pack. Hey. Niggas know me from north to the south. Never need no one, make my own club. Southside, reach apart, nigga, that's my road. Niggas selling drugs, man, I'm in a drought. They all know what I'm about. Stuck in bread, talk shit, catch lead to the head. All the shit's no man's like a book on the red. Stay away from the beds on the streets, no bed. Hey, deep water, I track, snow, no slip. I'll swamp me dead. This day I dread, bitch gave me head. See my strap, they fled. Hey, I know they said I don't be shit when I was in the ditch. Now pussy, I'm rich, they low, don't switch, they solid one bitch. See the flick of the wrist, I'm awesome shit, talk shit, get hit, big, don't call me lit. I keep my stick, I let it flick just like a pick. I'm in his house like old Saint Nick. She want my dick, she know I'm sick. I ain't a crip, that crack I nip. I hit his lip to be talking shit. Fuck his click and fuck his gang. I'll hit the 3 just like I'm dang. She wanna gang that 40 I bang. If he owe my gang, them hollows dang. My shorty's bang. She loves when I sing. She feels the pain. I'm in the rain. Hit the stain if that means getting paid. And this my click, you getting laid. I'm in the trap, the cops did a raid. I got that work, you know it's A grade. Man, you know you're rocking that wire in DC. Look behind the paint, man. You know you're rocking that whole strip lockdown, cuz. Hey. Hit it with a slug, go make it move slow. You know me, I'm all about my dough. Gotta make sure my boys don't flow. They love my beat, they rate my flow. My neck is cold, it's 0 below. Big wrist gon' shoot, you know I drove. I keep my heat, I ain't talking about a stove. I'm in a trap, selling food, no fresh code. That nigga wants beef, my strap gon' blow. Every time I drop a truck, my clothes gon' grow. Made sure he told me, don't live out low. I should've known that she was right. Because of that, we really tight. I'll bust my strap if she gon' fight. Hoodie on, I'll ride at night. I'll show my might, never flight. 40 with the beam in, EM sighting. I ain't missing, I ain't slipping, never tripping. Coke I'm whipping, check my waist, I'm really dripping. Packs I'm flipping, niggas talking, niggas snitching. Trigger finger really itch for fit. Niggas that want me dead. Nah, I ain't got me a 2 in the head. These niggas run to God like Ned. Check my flag, it's really red. Married to the game, not newlywed. Niggas watch my every move. They just wanna see me lose. These niggas lost like blues. My flow is sick, it's got the flu. Hey. I make bread, just call me Dempster's in her mouth just like a denture. I am icy, looking fresher. Fuck that bitch, I'll never miss her. She respect me, call me Mr. Since she left, I have been better. Really wish I never met her. Pays these niggas like a letter.
Ruled that Quebec's secularism law is largely legal, but Justice Marc-André Blanchard acknowledged that the controversial Bill 21 violates the rights of Muslim women and has cruel and dehumanizing consequences for those who wear religious symbols. The law prohibits public sector workers who are deemed to be in positions of authority from wearing symbols such as hijabs, kippahs, or turbans at work. Rogers says a credit will be automatically added to a future bill for all customers after Monday's countrywide outage. The outage left millions without voice calls, texting, and data service for many hours. Experts say the nearly day-long outage had deep economic repercussions as many people work from home during the pandemic. The telecom giant says the root of the intermittent wireless service was a recent software update by its network partner, Ericsson. Quebec and Saskatchewan have joined Ontario, Alberta, Manitoba, and BC in lowering the age requirement for the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine. Saskatchewan says those 40 and older can now register for the shot, Quebec dropping the age to 45. This despite 2 Canadians suffering a blood clot disorder after getting the shot. Health Canada has still licensed it for anyone over the age of 18. From the Global News Desk, I'm Toby Kerr.
Toby, and answer the question. The version I heard earlier was that they passed the law, but they left out the parts about face coverings. That's what they said. They left out the part about turbans on our face covering. Okay. So now we're getting into fucking semantics here. There's a lot of bullshit in this country. Oh, but Quebec's its own nation. Watch out for that one. When Ontario decides to separate.
A lot of death. Dr. Darren Martin, thank you very much for returning to our show tonight.
From Ontario, but
it's a pleasure, Mr. Adler. How are you doing?
Not as well as I'd like to be. I've been looking at a lot of the video out of India. I don't know how much attention you paid for it. You've been paying to it. Look, it's not just about India. It's just that I'm one of these people, because of conversations I've had with you and others
got his
that I've
name.
been blessed to have a connection with. It's impossible for me, Dr. Markland, to believe that we could have what we have in India and have none of it happen here in Canada. I wonder if you've been doing any reading on India or watching any of the videos and paying attention to the hottest of the hotspots right now on the planet.
Yeah, it's horrific. I'm sure it's here. We have a very large population that travels back and forth. That hasn't stopped. This variant, we just don't have any information on how different it is from others and how it reacts to a vaccine, but it will be circulating in Canada.
Well, we
This
keep hearing about
virus
this
must have
double
been
mutant,
mutating a long time
and actually
before
we
we
need to
came
get more
across
information on it.
SARS-2.
And I'm not suggesting it's the double mutant that's necessarily causing the acceleration in death in India. I mean, when you see lines about how in many Indian cities and towns right now, the furnaces for the crematoriums are running 24/7. I mean, that is just painful. It is ghastly. And it does seem like something that's happened all of a sudden, which would lend itself at least, to the notion that the virus has mutated and it's become more lethal in India.
There's so many factors that affect that. I mean, we know during the first wave, for example, New York was a perfect example. We got our first mortality data from New York, and it was incredibly high. And then we found, once we kind of got control of the situation, that it wasn't as bad as we thought. When systems are overwhelmed, care drops precipitously. And I think India is very tenuous to start off with. There's very good health care for those who can afford it. But for the majority, it's very basic services. And when things get out of control in India, they really get out of control. And that's why we're seeing such high numbers.
China.
Dr. Markland, let me just throw one line at you. It's just a fact that it's happening in, once again, many different Indian cities and towns right now. They're running out of oxygen. What does that mean to your ears? You're an intensive care doctor. What would your life, what would your patients' lives be like if you were running out of oxygen?
Who are you not fighting with?
You know, I'm highly trained. I've gone to school for a very, very long time, but I'm absolutely useless without tools.
By the
People
way,
are far
why is
to
India
apply
fighting with
far
China at the
more
border?
care with minimal interventions than I can. But oxygen, I mean, that is about as basic as it gets. Once you get there, that is when your hospital is already collapsed.
I mean, it's the equivalent of running out of blood, is it not?
No, it's a lot worse.
It's worse. I mean, we don't give a lot of blood anymore, but what brings people to, there are common things that bring people to hospital: being short of breath, being in pain. If I ran out of morphine, if I ran out of fluids, if I ran out of oxygen, I'd be no better than working in the field. And in fact, field medics would have more supplies than I would.
There's another way that the India situation is going to be affecting us. That's where the AstraZeneca vaccine is made, at least the batches that we've been ordering, they're being suspended. A lot of people have been very excited about getting AstraZeneca of late because the government has reduced the requirements, and so people over 40 are getting it in several provinces, including Alberta. But it would appear that because of the situation in India, because they frankly need the vaccine more than anyone on earth, so they need for it to stay there, we're going to be short on AstraZeneca very soon in this country.
Yeah, the Serum Institute has made some statements, very clear statements. They will start redirecting production. We do, of course, have contracts in place, but I can only imagine under humanitarian reasons those will be redirected. And it also brings to the forefront just how important world equity is with respect to treating this pandemic. If we let our countries continue these epidemics, you're absolutely correct. We are going to have new variants, and possibly variants that do not respond to vaccination.
Dr. Markland, was it a mistake for many of us last year to be saying things like, well, it's been a very, very tough year. This 2020, it's been a real dog.
21st century
2021 is bound to be much
No, it
better.
seems it's been 20
How,
years.
how
but
much of a
on the
mistake
grand
is that? I
scale,
don't mean a
that's not a
mistake in
lot of
terms of
time.
getting a prediction wrong. People get predictions
We had
wrong all the time.
SARS
But some
in
predictions have
2002.
consequences. I just have this feeling that that some people, whether they were involved in government or lay people, I think got a little complacent at the beginning of this year. And of course, now we're finding out that complacency is the enemy. Well, what are your thoughts about that?
I think human nature is a balance between anticipation and reality. I think, the number of interviews I've given where I've just tried to give people some hope. So
I want to be laid out in a section of the sidewalk
the
when they
reality
repave
is
it,
that
and when they put down the gravel and the first layer of concrete, then you put me down, then you put the second layer
human nature
of the concrete.
started to get ahead of us, and vaccines were
Stamp it,
part of it. We looked at it as the universal solution, when really the universal solution was doing the right thing from the start, going for COVID zero, holding our lockdowns down, supporting people financially so that we could actually do it, shutting things down like Australia, like Vietnam, so that they're actually traveling now. But we didn't. We decided to go for the big bet, just like the States did, and that was the wrong call.
So the Prime Minister today was asked specifically, because so many doctors are calling for no more flights from the hot zones, specifically, of course, everyone's now identifying India and the fact that we've got planes coming into Canada every few hours from India. And his take was that that wasn't necessary because security precautions are so stringent that we're not really allowing people with any kind of COVID-19 to come off those planes and into general society. What's your overall take on
exceptionally virulent strain?
I don't believe it for a second. I've heard that story over and over again. I heard that when we first got COVID, the wild type. I heard that when we were going to control B117, and now it's our dominant strain in Alberta. And I've heard that with the P1 variant from Brazil, and that's now taking off as well. I don't believe this for a second. I think the only thing that's really going to fix this is truly a COVID zero strategy. And people say that that's a radical way to think, but Ontario has just released their triage policy, and I think that's incredibly radical.
Set up camps and keep these people there? Like, what are you talking about?
We'll talk about the triage policy in just a second, but I just want to button down this business of allowing or not allowing planes in. I mean, I just don't understand why, this isn't about Trudeau specifically, but I don't understand why decision makers say things that are demonstrably untrue. The reason we have variants in this country is because they came from somewhere. They didn't come from Estevan, Saskatchewan. They came from various parts of the world. So wouldn't it be incumbent upon any official that has any control over whether or not planes are coming onto our territory with respect to the variant issue, and the variant issue is getting worse, not better, especially in India? Isn't it incumbent upon that official to take it seriously, as opposed to just getting out the same old flashcard that makes some people who don't know anything feel good and say everything's under control? Isn't this too serious a situation for that simple flashcard to be rehashed over and over again?
Absolutely, but it's only part of the solution. Given enough time, we will generate our own variant here. When our numbers get high enough, that's how recombination works. And in fact, our population has immunosuppressed individuals where these things tend to grow, more of them, because we have medicine that supports people who are very ill for a long time. I think yes, if we did these strategies, these COVID strategies, which include closing our borders, closing down international flights, and locking things down until we get our numbers down to zero, and then sequentially reopening, yes, absolutely. Shutting flights down from endemic areas is part of that solution. But if we do that and we don't do the things that reduce our spread, we will generate them as well.
Well, it's just everything at the end of the trail is about math. I don't know how you can have almost 300,000 infections daily in India. And that's just based, of course, on what we test. I mean, a huge swath of the country doesn't get tested at all. So just based on the testing, we're getting almost 300,000 infections a day in India. How can you have that number, once again, just focusing on the math and the probabilities, how can you have that amount of infections without getting mutations regularly?
Well, mutations happen when there's a niche for a virus, something that gives it an advantage.
There's another guy named
What's going on right now
Charles
in India, this virus already has an advantage. Then there isn't pressure on it. When we exert pressure either through vaccines or through immunocompromised individuals, that's when when a virus sometimes recombines and becomes better. You're right. The more reproduction there is, the more chances are that these viruses will make mistakes and come up with different variants. But often those variants aren't as successful as the ones that are propagating. Going through India is actually one of the perfect forms of this virus right now.
So at the moment, you don't know very much about the so-called double mutant variant in India.
There's no data on it right now. There's very little out in the scientific literature. I'm fascinated. The term double mutant is scary by its nature, but the thing about coronavirus is what causes it to be pathogenic is very preserved. It's the spike protein that allows it to go into every cell in our blood vessels. Whether it's mutated once, twice, or 15 times,
like
the mutations have to be beneficial to it. And so if it is a double mutant and that has improved its efficiency, then yes, it is a more dangerous virus.
Dr. Markland, just before we go to a break here, the sort of conventional conclusion on SARS is that the thing just ran out of gas. Is there any reason to think, based on what we know now, that coronavirus will run out of gas?
SARS didn't run out of gas. It was such a lethal and sick virus that people got sick very quickly, and we could identify that. And that's why it got quarantined very quickly. The new version had a very long asymptomatic phase.
The less likely it is to spread. This COVID-19 is just bad enough. It doesn't kill everything off. It just keeps mutating from animal to animal.
It's a virus that has the perfect combination of characters. It's not super lethal, but it gets people sick. It spreads very quickly, and now it's technically airborne. So it has become one of the perfect viruses to spread around the world and become a permanent endemic infection.
So 5 years from now, we'll still be talking about this. We'll have people scheduled to get booster shots and all of that. But the idea that, like last year, we were thinking this thing would go away in 2021 in Canada. We're not even thinking of those terms anymore, are we?
No, it's never going away. This is a fact of life now.
Dr. Darren Markland in Edmonton saying that coronavirus right now, like it or not, is a fact of life. He's an intensive care doctor and nephrologist at the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Alberta. Our conversation with Dr. Darren Markland continues in a moment. If you've got a question or comment, here's my number, 1-877-399-9898, toll free, 1-877-399-9898. Thanks for joining us on a Tuesday night from Charles Adler tonight.
Hello, I am water.
And I am earth, and we are just made for...
Now, right after that Subaru commercial, they should
how
run
fast the water is flowing and how light is to lubricate the ice surface.
Mike, what's been the biggest technical challenge here? Because you're talking about water and electronics, they don't go together very well, and I know from my own mobile phone that it just refuses to work. The battery just dies if the temperature goes below about 4 degrees in this country, so there's a lot to go wrong with your transmitter and the batteries.
The biggest challenge has been the mechanics. So in order to put a cryo egg down a hole, we've been relying on accessing an ice core hole where people are drilling out an ice core and they leave behind a borehole, and there's a standard size for an ice core which is about 120 millimeters, so that really constrained the maximum size that we could make cryo egg. And so everything has had to fit inside this relatively small sphere, which has got relatively thick walls to resist the pressure. So getting everything really small, getting the antenna really small, getting the battery really small has been the big challenge. And yeah, power consumption is an issue. Fortunately, we found that the lithium polymer batteries, the kind of thing that's in your mobile phone, actually will do just fine at low temperatures, as long as you make allowance for that in the circuit design. So it's not too bad, and the technology is improving all the time.
And finally, Liz, what does this all mean for you in your science then, having this cryo egg to help out?
It really gives us the sort of missing piece of the puzzle in what's going on underneath the ice sheets. We know that they're melting, and we know that the water is going underneath the ice. So there are lots of very skilled modelers who are saying, okay, we know if the temperature is going to rise by this much. If we run the climate models, we know how much the temperature is going to go up in different regions of the Earth. Therefore, that equates to this much melting. We know that sometimes more melting means that you get faster flowing ice, but we also know that if you get more melting going underneath the ice, then these self-organized rivers start forming. So the cryo egg gives us that little missing piece that tells us, okay, where have we got these rivers forming and where have we not got those rivers forming? What is the most likely structure of the drainage system? Then if you can link that with the climate models and with the temperature forecasts, then we can predict what's the speed of the ice, and that gives us an idea of how much ice is going to melt over the next 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, and what's that going to mean for global sea level.
That's Dr. Les Bagshaw, and you also heard there from Dr. Mike Pryor-Jones. So, Glenn Boddington, of course, we know that satellites give us lots of observations of ice sheets. So, what's the benefit of having a cryo egg?
Toys.
Well, you're right. I was thinking about this. What's a comparison? And satellites do see, features beneath the surface, such as like entire lakes that are hidden beneath the surface, because they can see the effect on the ice surface. And I thought it reminded me a bit of how when you do aerial photography of expansive land mass, that can reveal archaeological sites with clues which show, on the surface, but they're only just showing. You can't see them till you're way up in the air. And I think this cryo egg obviously is very cleverly looking beneath the surface itself. It's gathering data that can't be obtained by the satellites, by the remote sensing satellites. So it's very clever, isn't it? We need it. We need it because these climate change predictions, we've got to move forward on it. We've all got a responsibility now today to, I think, understand more about the water system behaviours that have been shifted by climate change. And I think that this clever monitoring by technologies such as the cryo egg, we really need it.
Okay, Glenn, thank you very much indeed for that. Now, finally, gosh, doesn't time fly? I'm going to talk about this, solar cells that work indoors. Sunshine and interior light, they're actually quite different. So to convert the light into electricity, you need different kinds of materials. So now a research team reports that it has materials that could lead to indoor solar panels. The work is in the journal Advanced Energy Materials, and our reporter Florian Bohr has been reading the research paper.
When I heard of the finding of a new indoor solar cell material, my first thought was,
you can put it
why not
under
just take the solar
concrete and
panels
railroad ties
outside
and light up.
Conditions apply. Visit your local GTA Volvo retailer or volvocars.ca.
So I thought SARS, we were told, came from eating civet cats. SARS, like he said, killed people too quick for it to spread too far. I was thinking about that. This thing was mutating in bats and all sorts of animals. All sorts of mutations before the one we caught that we called coronavirus 2, SARS 2. But they would have been more lethal. They wouldn't have spread as far.
I got a question. Is the virus affecting certain blood groups more than others, and if so, how?
Dr. Markland.
Initially, there was some concerns that it was, but once we actually kind of did the reverse analysis, the age groups that we thought were having worse outcomes weren't actually part of that cohort. This virus locks on to a receptor called an ACE2 receptor in the blood vessels, and people with this blood group had proportionally more of them. But it's kind of like you don't have to open, if there's one lock that you have to open to infect a cell, and if you have two of them, it doesn't make that much of a difference. So the short version is blood type doesn't make a big difference with respect to infection or outcomes.
Leslie, thank you very much. I got a text here from Winnipeg from Bart. Dr. Markland, is it possible there are some people who have natural immunity to coronavirus and therefore can never catch it?
Definitely a possibility. Coronavirus is endemic. Before we got this version of coronavirus, it caused common colds all the time. There is probably some cross-reaction virus, but it's not long-lived because, as we know, coronavirus changes and mutates, and also natural immunity wanes. So people who have had a lot of exposure to coronavirus, for example, people who work with small children who have a lot of exposure to these viruses may have some, but it's not around long enough to provide any stable or long-acting immunity. The vaccine immunity we know is much more robust, and we've proven that because we've seen, for example, the P1 variant reinfect people who've had original infections, but not people who've been vaccinated the AstraZeneca vaccination.
Let me take Jay in the North Van. This will likely be the last live question. Jay, you're on with Dr. Darren Markland in Edmonton.
Hello, good evening, Dr. Darren Markland. And Charles Hunter yourself. Hi. I got a quick question. So I got a whole bunch of friends that are doctors and nurses, all in the various hospitals in the Lower Mainland. And every time you guys, every time it's they tell us it's overflowed with the ICUs and full patients, they're always telling me that they're absolutely empty. In fact, they haven't even seen the hospitals this empty in forever. So I'm curious what your take is on that.
I can't speak for their hospitals, but I can speak for mine. We've just opened up our surge unit, and we're now recruiting more staff. And we have serious concerns about shortages of some of the new medications used to treat coronavirus. I think when you hear those things, different parts of the hospitals may be empty for different reasons. For example, the elective surgery wards, or sometimes we saw in the first and second waves that people weren't coming to the emergency departments because they were afraid. I can assure you, though, that when someone gets short of breath, they were on the medical wards or the COVID wards, and our ICUs were stuffed to the brim with people who did have these infections.
Are you hearing about any ICUs in any city in this country being empty?